Hello everyone. In today's video, I want to break down the mechanism of what makes Vipassana work, as well as make a case of why Vipassana may not be the most efficient vehicle if your sole desire and objective is to maintain stillness, and if you're looking for the fastest way of stilling the mind throughout your day. Now, to first understand Vipassana, we must first understand the mechanisms of what makes it work, as well as kind of some of its downfalls. As someone who's taken multiple Vipassana workshops, silent meditations, different 10-day meditation retreats, I must say that Vipassana, for the benefit of it, is that it's incredibly accessible for the average person, especially given that it has this nonprofit structure where you can donate what you can, and it's virtually accessible in most major countries and city hubs around the world. And it's really proliferated in that sense and made the experience of experiencing stillness so accessible for the modern seeker. And for many who come out of these workshops, it's the first time that they've really experienced something that is metaphysical in nature and that is beyond the egoic self. Right? The challenge of Vipassana is that it was designed in a time where very much not for the monks and not for the people in the temples, but for the everyday householder. However, times have significantly changed, and the life of an everyday householder today is very different than the life of a householder 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Let's talk about the challenge that we face now versus before, right? For example, in the past, it's very hard to actually get access to a crazy amount of stimuli, whereas right now we have social media, we have different levels of stress, we're expected to be on phone access 24/7, and a lot of the EMF radiation, such as like buzzing in our field, and it makes it very hard, even if we live a very simple lifestyle, just having the EMF and the 5G signals, it makes it significantly harder to actually reach a level of stillness that if someone, for example, in this background, living in the countryside, working on a farm, it's much easier to reach this stillness. And I'm sure if anyone has experienced long times, having both living in the city and living in the countryside, you can tell for yourself that it's an uphill battle just to stay in any sort of a spiritual path and a level of stillness in a downtown of a city where everything's so fast-paced and all the people, versus being out in nature, you don't even need to meditate and you already feel mindful. Vipassana is designed for these people in the countryside and these people living a simpler lifestyle. Now, the mechanism of what makes Vipassana work, there's two aspects that makes it a bit hard to replicate in a daily basis. So the first is the instruction is to observe, and whenever your mind wanders, you want to just simply notice that, and through that intentionality, it brings you back into equanimity. So it's very much like observe, do not touch, and the thoughts where the emotional construct begins to dissolve as long as you can keep your mind as an observer. Now, the challenge of that is that it may not feel like it, but it does take a level of energy to actually have that intent. In Chinese, we call that yi. So it's like intentionality and almost like a little bit of willpower to just bring your mind and continue staying in the observation mode and releasing constantly. You will find that if you live in a very stressful environment, and if you're living in an environment that's constantly taxing you, constantly exhausting you, then you get to a point where you want your mind to just free flow, and you're just so tired that even doing the whole sitting down and observing feels exhausting. The second aspect of what makes it challenging is that the requirement of actually having Vipassana to work optimally is 2 hours in a day. So 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening. Now that's asking a lot. And even for someone who does this full time, there's many seasons in my life that I don't have 2 hours a day to just sit down and not think about anything. So that requirement, again, it might be practical in a slower time. But right now, especially with the economy and global events, everything's speeding up. And we want to find a methodology that gets us to stillness within a much quicker time span as opposed to having to invest 2 hours in a day. And what I found after the Vipassana retreat is that even if I were to keep up a daily habit, let's say 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, that same level of stillness that I would have achieved coming out of the workshop, or the 10-day silence retreat, there is absolutely no way I can actually retain that level of stillness living a everyday lifestyle. It's only if I give up being a salary person, if I give up being a householder, maybe worrying about paying rent, worrying about paying for daily supplies, food and electric bill, all of these things, if I were to remove all of that, stay in the mountain and meditate 2 to 5 hours a day, I can maintain that level of stillness. Otherwise, you come out of the retreat, you feel very high and amazing, but that level of tranquility is very hard to maintain. So in contrast to Vipassana, and why I chose the path of internal alchemy, is that the internal alchemist plays the role of a spiritual scientist, and they understand the metaphysics and the causation chain of what actually creates stillness. It is the objective of our training that, for example, the very first week, at least the very first couple of days, the type of stillness that we will get from sitting in an hour worth of meditation, by the end of that week, we want to be able to achieve that within one breath. And through deeper introspection, what we'll understand, and the ancients, they call this samadhi states, the void, the non-ego state, we will realize that there's actually different qualities of samadhi. And as an internal alchemist, we build the fastest, most efficient pathway in order to train these. And we work on the principle of flow state psychology, as well as having trigger events to trigger these flow states that we actually train. So what that means is that we both find the quality of different samadhi states, we learn to tap into them in longer periods of meditation, but afterwards we ritualize these experiences so that within one breath, we are able to tap into these heightened states. The type of training that we go into in later stages, for example, if we were to train for a month-long course in the art of Qi, is that we will begin to understand that there's all of these fine qualities and levels of stillness. And by the end, we will learn master meditative experiences where we trigger different psychological patterning that we've trained for. Each trigger, there might be hours of meditation packed into that, but we can trigger multiple levels, 10, 20, 30 levels of stillness that stacks onto one another, and it creates a whole different experience within the alchemical framework. So you can perceive this as almost like an athlete where they have a certain ritualized gesture in order to get into the zone right before the big game. Whether that's basketball, maybe you pump your chest, or every top performer, like Tony Robbins, he likes to jump on his trampoline and spread out his hands. And there's all of these rituals that top performers will do. And one must understand, just like how they need to get into this certain zone and into this certain internal stillness, the type of stillness that a Tony Robbins figure who is doing public speaking is very different than an NBA player, than a professional soccer player. And although we can call all of them stillness, there's a certain qualitative difference in these. So as a spiritual alchemist, we train and we begin to open our eyes into the different subtle qualities of it. And unlike top performers where they're doing only one ritual to get into their specific state, we learn how to tap into our internal mechanism to trigger multiple states simultaneously. And the interaction of these states creates almost like a separate experience on its own. So why I like this type of training better is because I feel like the process of internal alchemy is almost like you're approaching it like an engineer. You're understanding what makes the parts work, and you're creating the most efficient mechanism into your own internal practice that gets you that state. And it's because of that that we can basically bypass two aspects. That was the shortfall that I mentioned for Vipassana meditations. The first was that it requires a great lot of energy to bring your mind back and constantly stay in that release state, especially when you're feeling tired and you're dealing with so many external stress. So that is to say that even if you're meditating for 2 hours, but you're bombarded with all these external stress from modern life, that 2 hours may not have good quality towards it. So the first thing, how we bypass this through internal alchemy is that before we get into stillness, we first learn the principle of actually how to accumulate energy. And it's through that potential energy reservoir, when we max that out, then we bring it into higher vibratory states, that the natural byproduct of staying in that higher vibratory state is stillness on its own. So essentially, we're not using the lack of the field that we have internally from an entire day, but we're learning the skill to actually amass the energy before we go into stillness and bring and use that specific energy to supercharge the stillness within us, okay? And that would keep us running, and we can sit in these samadhi states for hours on end because we've cultivated these energy. Nonetheless, once you're out of this state, you can feel it. It's like, wow, it's exhausting training the mind. Just like you're lifting weights, you're doing that on a energetic and cognitive level. So you'll feel that, but the first thing before we go into accessing like very deep level of samadhi state, something you might get out of going into a Vipassana retreat for 10 days, a month, 2 months, 3 months, we want to tap into that with the right energy so that it can support it. So yes, that's the first thing with internal alchemy. The second is the 2 hours, right? And why it's impractical is that most people don't have the lifestyle that can actually support 2 hours, especially if you have kids, you have a company to run or whatever it is. So how we bypass that, again, it's like what type of stillness you can achieve within a 1 to 2 hour sit. We want to be able to achieve that within one breath. And when we train that, there's only a certain level of upkeeping that one must do on a weekly basis, and it's nominal compared to a 2 hour investment. that continues to allow us to tap into these still states. And the trick now is that you practice stillness not through a daily sit, but rather you make life your practice. You make life your practice. So what that means is that whenever you're feeling like you have external clutter and you have these like anxiety, whatever it is that requires stillness, you pop out your trigger immediately. And within that instant, you come back into stillness. And by you doing that time and time again, you're reinforcing these cognitive patternings so that you can achieve these samadhi states within one breath on a daily basis without having to do any sits whatsoever. And that's really the key here about how to make life your practice. We have students at the Art of Chi, they come to us for a month-long training, but at the end of that month, what do they really take away from it? Right? And if they take away that in order to actually continue this work, they need to be putting in full-time length of work to actually maintain the type of transmissions that they get, then that's a very useless class. So the goal here is that we want to give students the trigger pieces that they can actually use, and even afterwards they don't practice anything, they can continue to refine themselves on a daily basis. And also obviously the tools to go deeper on afterwards. So I think with the Vipassana methodology, it's like you have your phone. At the beginning of the day, your phone's battery is full and it runs throughout the day, and you're left with whatever amount of energy you have, and that's what you can use to achieve those stillness states. Whereas with internal alchemy, your phone is constantly plugged and you know how to continuously charge it on a daily basis so that you can stay at like the 60, 80, 100 range, and you can continue even when you're in the samadhi state and you're continuing practicing stillness, you can use the energy of nature, use the energy of your own cultivation in order to power that state as opposed to draining your battery at the end of the day. So I hope that made sense and give you a comparative analysis between the mechanisms of both Vipassana as well as internal alchemy, and why I, as a pragmatist, chose to go into the internal alchemy route in order to go into my own spiritual cultivation. I hope that's clear, and drop us a comment if you have any questions, and continue to follow us as well as subscribe in order to continue hearing insights about how us at Wisdom Tree Institute is connecting the ancestral wisdom of the East and the West into our own unique healing modality, as well as creating a blueprint into the model of ascension. I hope to hear from you shortly. Take care now.